Well, hello everybody. Here we go. You know what? If you don't have your name tag, they swear they've mailed it, but if not, I don't know. Turn off your phones, please. I hate phones. Wear your name tags. Please end your class on time. I can't do that. Anyway, Wisdom Wednesday tomorrow will be right here on this stage, 2:30 to 4 p.m. Mark Fagan will present his book, The Robert Trent Jones Gulf Trail, Its History and Economic Impact. And by the way, it pays certain people's pensions. I won't mention that. If you are at Auburn Church of Christ, please leave promptly because we have limited parking and you got to get the hell out of there, okay? Help me out. All right? All right? The tailgate bash has been canceled so that we can place a historical marker. I'm not sure. Tombstone, I don't know. And of course, the holiday social is this Thursday, December 6th. It's from 11:30 to 1:30 at Holy Trinity Episcopal Church in Auburn. Reservations will be accepted beginning October 15th. That's right around the corner, and are due by November 30th. Well, I've been reading the textbook, and one thing I found out that I was unaware of was that Romans and Greeks considered people of Northern European area barbarians because of their language. They didn't understand them. They actually thought they were speaking gibberish. Ba, ba, ba. Well, I guess that brings a question to my mind. What was the state of civilization in California in the 1960s? Ba, 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 baran. Oh, so you get the idea, okay? God. So it is now my pleasure to introduce someone who's always eloquent, but occasionally a bit difficult to understand from northern barbarians. Hurtful. It is now, again, my pleasure, and I want y'all to give a big welcome to Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
When you get him home, anyway, thank you, Frank, I think, and yeah, it's too late for that. Good try. Yeah, exactly. I'm crushed. Yes, but Kicklighter and the Germans, they do seem like they would have something in common, don't they? Yes, that name. I think they tried to fool us by anglicizing it, but I don't think they did a very good job. I think it's pretty clear its particular roots. The Germanic people that we are going to talk about, however, involve such a wide number of people that it's virtually what we call a generic term for so many people who come from the north during the course of the Roman Empire and before, and move southward. And they are in the composition of medieval Europe, the third of our elements, and a very important one because they will come to rule it. Let's note, first of all, how they are significant, because most of us never stop to think about this fact that they are a minority. Wherever they went, they ruled for sure, but never were they the majority of the populace. They simply intermarried over time, creating what we call Western European people, which fascinates me when you think about the fact that as a minority they were able to take over. But if we recall, the Western Roman Empire's military was no longer available. They had retreated, and the folks who were left are what we are, civilians. And so they became ruled by these German people. And I don't think they called them barbarians. I'm sure they kept, except behind closed doors maybe. But by and large, these Germanic people came to rule. And as such, they would become very important. And by important, I mean their culture became dominant. That's what I meant by mores. Essentially, we won't do it the old way, we'll do it your way. Because you're the ruler. Because we wonder about, for example, languages and matters of that sort. And our beloved Latin. And that's because of the Christians. But if it had been up to the Germans, we know, Helga, Carol, we would know about Anglo-Saxon and German. They would rule. But yes, instead, Latin. All of this, of course, we are going to see as we move on. Not only in language, but also in terms of the various institutions. And that will be very, very important. These kinds of institutions are unlike those of the Romans in most respects. Remember, these are illiterate people. We don't, as your book points out, we try to sort them and make them neat and put them all into little groups and so forth. And we think they were probably a lot more, if I may use the word, liberal than we are. In other words, I don't think they were fussy. Well, you can't come in here. This is for Visigoths only. I just don't think they were that fussy. But we have these general categories. One of the big areas that I always wonder about is when you talk about Celtic peoples, you know, the Celtics, listen to Boston. And then you think about Celts and Germans. If I had one of each, could we really tell the difference? Maybe linguistically, but I'm not even sure of that. They have much in common, but I'm sure they knew the difference. And of course, they were willing to fight about it, weren't they? Because that's part of their culture. But anyway, these kinds of differentiations are hard to understand. But that doesn't hurt us because we are concerned with the general cultural trends, and in that way, they were very much alike. On the other hand, you make all these generalizations, and if you were somebody who knows lots about this, you can always find an exception. But you will understand, of course, that this is not about specifics, but about the general picture of Germans and how they will affect the development of medieval civilization. With that, then, we're ready for this beautiful color map, which will show us the Roman Empire and then these folks in baby blue just panting up there. They're excited, and they're thinking about many of our own post-World War II people go south. We want the sun, we want the land. We're excited. Let's go south. One other feature of this map that I know will excite some in here, if you will look north, you will see a reference to people who are called Slavs. Okay? I'm not. Yeah, I heard that. Those Slavic peoples, they will be part of the general trend of going south. They also want the nice weather. The Slavs and the Germans will take different directions. As you know, the Slavs going east while the Germans are going west, and more of that later. But I just wanted us to note that Slavic peoples are also on the move, and they will provide lots of interesting experiences for the Eastern Roman rulers, because they too will want lands to settle. So, to note that. Meanwhile, the various peoples that you see there in blue are moving. And when did they start moving? Well, shoot, they've been moving since before Christ. And in some ways, they've been encouraged to move because the Roman population was declining. We don't know why, but I think I mentioned that to some of you at one point. And if we have less people, then we need more people to work, farm. So they invite Germans to come as farmers and, frankly, as warriors. Y'all want to come fight? You come fight for us. That doesn't mean that Germans aren't still going to fight the Romans, but sometimes they're fighting their fellow Germans. It just kills me to think you got the Germans now fighting for the Romans, and they are fighting their fellow Germans because now they're in the Roman military. So, all of this goes on long before the period with which we are concerned here. It just kills me that it's just suddenly, it's like the floodgates are open. Because by the time period with which we're concerned, the 5th century after Christ, Romans can no longer control their own borders. And that's what is going to be so significant here to me. How do we know about them? Well, we have archaeological evidence, just as unpleasantly the World War II began in 1939. British archaeologists discovered this. And when you are in London, if you are in the British Museum, you can see this. This is Sutton Hoo. I think it's so interesting because there they discovered the great treasures of an Anglo-Saxon Germanic ruler. Remember, in those days, before Christianity, they believe you can take it with you. So, want all your nice stuff, because you're hanging out with gods and goddesses, and when you have a party, you want to have your best china and your silver. See, we don't have to worry about that anymore. But that was very important, and they had beautiful things. So, that's an interesting source, archaeology, for learning about these Germanic peoples. It's only one because there are so many. However, remember, Germanic peoples are not literate. So if we're going to get those kinds of sources, we're going to have to get somebody else to be writing about them, okay? Because they're not going to write themselves. And that, is obviously something we would love to have, but we don't. How did they get there, and how do we find out? Well, it goes all the way back to what made many of us love Latin so very much. I was going to say, I don't know when it happened for you, when you first fell in love with the Latin language. Each of us has our own experience. I'm sure that moment that we looked at our teacher and we said, I'll never get over this. This is... But in this case, the conquest of the Gallic peoples over the 10-year period by Julius Caesar allows him, of course, to have, shall we say, experiences with Germanic peoples and to write about them. And you bet you didn't think at that time, wow, this will help us understand medieval history. I bet you're just thinking about, I want out of this place. But that is true, though. Caesar's Gallic Wars is a great early source. Not, I would think, compared to this one. Because Tacitus is magical. Again, yes. And you may say, but Pshaw, do I have to do it in English? No. The original is available, and it could be at your door, thanks to Amazon, by tomorrow if you get busy when you get home. Tacitus' work, the Germania, it's in hardback or paperback. Yeah, it's that popular. So you can get this. I mean, it's one of those, it's a classic, you know. If you're collecting classics, I can't imagine that any home could be complete without Tacitus' Germania. Everything you wanted to know about the Germans but were afraid to ask in less than 100 pages. I mean, there you are. He, as many of you know, was a senator, part of the aristocracy, nostalgic about the Republic and the way life used to be. And he was fascinated by Germans that he must have encountered from the military. He never went there, but didn't want to. But he was fascinated by them. And I guess what for him was their exotic culture. You see his dates, 56 to 117. So that's pretty early on in the process. This was after the humiliating losses to Germans by the earlier Emperor Caesar Augustus. Some of you will remember. So, I mean, they were not unaware that the Germans were up there, and as your textbook writer says, that they were smelly. I'm sure they were in many ways considered crude and rude, but they were an interesting element for them. And he approaches them almost anthropologically, like, here they are, and look at them, and look at their culture. And this, more than Julius Caesar's work, provides us with a description of these people in these early stages. Had any entered the Roman Empire? Of course they had. They were farming, they were fighting, they were doing all kinds of things in the Roman Empire if they got in, but they weren't in en masse. So we're not yet to our particular period. I'm just now looking at some of the sources of information. And when we get to the description of the Germans, I will go back to Tacitus, which I have and love still. I mean, yeah, one of his greatest hits. There were several because he is one of the greatest of all the Roman historians. Is he biased? Oh, yes. But in a romantic way. It's like many of their ways seem to charm him. by saying they love family values. They are traditional and all. And we read this as being sort of basically saying, see, you Romans, you don't have these things. You lost them. They talk about the women are devoted to the home and family and hard working because they're out there farming. Yeah? And all of this is to say, unlike you Romans, because you're going around and not conducting yourselves in ways that are appropriate. It's all of that we get that sense from Tacitus that while he wouldn't have any desire to be a German, I'm sure, he is somewhat nostalgic for what he views as their ways of valor and gentility at times, but in rare times, I would think. But gentility as far as the women are devoted mothers and all of that. So, but it's still useful. You just have to read through those things and understand what they are. Other sources, because I could go on with this forever, law codes, histories of the various Germanic peoples, and you say, how does all this come about? I'll tell you how. Christians. That's right. They're coming to a Germanic tribe near you. And when they do, you know what they're going to say? Can't we keep a record of this for you? I mean, you all are great. We really admire you, but you are illiterate. Wouldn't you love to have a written law code? Yeah. And these people are going, wow, we never really thought about that. We just thought Grandpa could tell us, you know. It's sort of like these oral traditions, no one really challenged them until these Christians come along. And that will be the same in these histories, which we will come back to. The Gregory of Tours, the history of Franks, available on a Penguin, Amazon. And Jordanus, the Goetica, or the history of the Ostrogoths, as two examples of Christians of great note writing about Germanic peoples. Are they part of the flock? No. But from their point of view, they are telling us about it and seeing, I might add, these people and their role is providential. There's nothing, it's not just one of those things. No, 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 no. This was all part of the divine plan, that these people would come along and do what they did, and we will see that as we move forward. But again, notice, other than the archaeology, all the sources are going to be Christian. And normally, they will be supportive of the people whom they describe. Because simply because these people are Germans doesn't mean there's any kind of pan-German movement here. They fight each other constantly. Fighting is part of what makes them what they are. So the writer tends to say Ostrogoths or Franks, Visigoths, whatever they are, they tend to be the good guys in the like in the movie, and the others are like evil. Or maybe even, I'm going to use that H word, heretics. Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of that going around during this time, as we will see. Now, would that I had hours and hours, but note just the general institutions. And I was reading the other day a very important point I wanted to share, and that is they had no concept of what we would call impersonal institutions. Germanic peoples felt every institution was personal to them or it didn't exist. If I just said, if you don't vote, City Hall may do something about you, and you said, what's a City Hall? Because that concept, as hard as it may be to believe, was not known to them. The idea of just this impersonal institution, all of their government and rules of life were based on who they were and who everybody else was. So, I guess there probably still people like that today. You know, if you study your anthropology and you find all people who have not yet been civilized, if that's what you call it. This culture, though, is based on the families, the clans, the tribes. Everybody has a relationship to everybody else, or else you don't count. I guess they had lots of adoptees, because the main thing is your whole existence is based on that, which is really odd to think. And I guess it would include your slaves too. I mean, everybody had to be a part of some group, or you were a non-person, the other, I guess. All of these were based on this, and Tacitus goes over this very closely in the Germania, no question about it, because he wanted us to understand there is no government of Visigothia. And so everybody could say, uh-oh, I got to go pay a ticket down at the Visigothic City Hall. No, I mean, there is nothing of that sort. It's just everything is between individuals. Leaders of the group have essentially meetings. I don't think it's exactly democratic, because I think they determine pretty much everything that's going on, the big shots. But that isn't surprising. They are the leaders. The families, tribes, and again, the tribes are simply collections of great families who come together. And it must be based on lots and lots of intermarriages to bring all this about. That's the only way I can see it's working. And so then, of course, then they have their struggles and their fights. There's nothing of what I would call nationalism or any of those kinds of modern ideas. Everything is based on family and who you are within that family, because that will determine. And that's why when we talk about this, the feuds among the families are very, very important, because as always, it isn't so much the fight, it's the aftermath and the settlement, which I'm sure they teach some in law school. All of this means that the people as a whole are divided into these clans, but the clans are united by the tribal leaders. Is it all male? Well, if it were, they couldn't have any reproduction, right? So, yes, of course, it means everybody, men, women, and children. But in terms of rule and control, it's all about the chieftains, the leaders, and everyone else is involved. And what do the chieftains and their followers do? They fight. Well, what about the people who are going to be farmers? Well, I'm afraid they're not in the leadership circle. They are the others. And what do women do? Farm and bear children. Not a surprise. No, okay, good. I don't want to shock anybody. It's like, that is the way of society. Now, the comitatus, which is fourth declension, I think basically it's your group that follow you. Because in addition to your family, your comitatus will consist of your, and it sounds like something out of the mafia, these are your people. So when you walk around, you know, you're the big one. You probably got a little age on them too, maybe a wound or two, because you've been around. Your guys are pledged to you. And again, it sounds like something out of an Italian ceremony, doesn't it, where they pledge their fidelity. How that fits into the comitatus of the family, I guess, means this is a kind of special relationship. Because without this, you see, we don't know. There's no standing army. These people don't have an army. It means that families fight among themselves. And what do they fight about? Well, what have you got? I mean, it's like, it could be women, it could be land. Like I say, the usual. I mean, some things I never knew, are they? Now, the Virgil, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you, Heather. Is basically a way to avert fighting, because everything can be compensated. That's what I meant about the after effects. You might have a great time while you're fighting because you've had a little beer or something. Germans and the beer, you know. Well, after then, these two men are brawling, and one of them knocks the other one down and maybe takes off his arm or something like that. Well, I know, it's unfortunate. And you say, well, what are you going to do? You going to call 911 as they do on my television show? No, you have to either go after the other one, feuding, got that feuding going, or apparently over time they developed the idea of vergeld, or man money as it's sometimes translated, meaning like, you liked that arm, didn't you? I bet you miss it. And you say, yeah, I'm kind of sad. I think about it a lot. I tell you what, my family would like to give your family these beautiful heifers out here. And you know, that's Elsie and somebody else, you know, whatever, you know, that'll make that little noise. They say, whoa, those are gorgeous. I guess that's worth that arm. You want to shake hands? No, but, oh, yeah, that was bad. But, yeah, but, that was, the idea is, of course, that we have settled it without a struggle. People ask me sometimes, does that mean they're going to be friends from now on? I don't think so, and there could be another fight. But there is what we could call a Virgil schedule. And it's funny, they have discovered this in these various law codes, depending on what part of the anatomy, I mean, an eye or a finger, or there's so many parts. And you know, I don't know how these folks live through it, you know, in terms of, and to think of them getting medical treatment, I don't know. I think I'd rather just be taken out, because I don't think that would be too pleasant. But the Virgil works, and it all depends on how much you're worth. And as your book points out, and I think it's interesting, no one is worth more than, say, a 14-year-old noble female. You know why? Because she could have so many children. And that source of fertility makes her value. Now, what about a young woman who's a peasant, out of luck? It's all about where you are on the social scale. And do I need to say that a woman who is more advanced in age does not? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. They don't have a lot of appreciation for senior citizens. I don't think there were a whole lot of them around, but the idea being that those who are young and those who are in those special roles would have had high Virgils. Because Virgils can also, refer to Virgil for someone who dies, because a lot of that's going around too, in addition to people who are merely mutilated. I mean, that too. I mean, let's face it, arms and eyes, I mean, that just happens. That's through living. You say, well, what about your peasants? No, they're working, they're fine, thank you very much. They don't have any, they're not involved in this so much, I would think. This is really something to do with the warrior class and what the warrior class does, possibly when they've had too much to drink, and the violence and so forth involved with them. For other kinds of crimes, the famous ordeals took place. I've often wondered again if they took place or they just scared them through the thought of the ordeal. The ordeal by fire, which some of you know about, had to do with picking up the hot coal and holding it, and I know, and you would say, wow, that hurts. And of course, seeing how the healing process took place, or walking through the coal, or alternatively, the ordeal by water, in which the person was placed in the pool of water to be determined whether or not the individual came up too soon. Because if you came up too soon in this kind of ordeal, it meant that the water wouldn't take you. And that was a sure sign. Guilty. And you said, but it was one of those, there's no more to say. You're a loser. Okay? So these things, you didn't have a lot of these slow processes. It could be done, get it finished. So the ordeal was very, very important. Now, how do we know the ordeal took place? Well, again, we have the Christians to thank. Because when the Christians come in, you see, they are going to say, could we keep a record of this? We would love to have files on all this. So some of their records are going to tell us, in fact, that prior to the holding of the ordeal, the accused will sit down with someone of the priesthood. And the priest is going to say, the person in the priesthood is going to say, oh, that looks so hot. Are you sure you want to go through this? I bet that would hurt. And I think this person goes on and says, yeah, I did it. You got me, copper. You know, that kind of thing, like my movies. But it's like more or less the thought of the ordeal and what it would impose supposedly means that ordeals were not often necessary. How would we know? But it's a possibility. The thought of the ordeal was enough to excite people. And there were other ways. Compurgation seems to me much more pleasant. If I were some sort of culprit, from Latin, of course, we know about taking oaths and purging. All of this has to do with the idea of oath-taking. Germanic peoples had what I would almost call a fetish with oaths. I mean, oaths are nice. We like to watch them on television or maybe go to the great ceremonies and hang there in the audience and say, wow, that was really neat. But that's one thing. In these Germanic, there was magic in the oath. So not only do you take the oath that I didn't do this, and use a lot of those marvelous Germanic words, but you have other people who take the oath and says, he's telling the truth. He really didn't do it. Okay, thanks very much. Next. In other words, you mean they give evidence? No, there's no evidence. You just take oaths. And if somebody gets mixed up in the words, okay, that doesn't work. You made a boo-boo, so your oath doesn't count. So you get thrown out. I mean, not literally, but I just mean that you can't count as one of the witnesses. You say, well, that just seems bizarre. Well, aren't we happy we're in civilization? That is the idea, though, oath takers, compurgation. So you would be settled by who got the most oath takers and how well did they take it. And presumably you have individuals who could say, sorry, we can't count that one. He got two words mixed up, something like that, because the taking of an oath had to be perfect, and if it wasn't perfect, it would be a sign that it was somehow offensive or blemished. Interesting how much an oath can mean. Now, we know, obviously, that the upper class ruled, and they ruled not by governing so much as just by fighting each other. Fighting was a way of life. Tacitus will point this out, that that is their reason for being, one might say. That is what they brought their young men up to do. They did have slaves, people who were captured from the other side, whoever the other side might be. And presumably they too became part of those families as time went on, because it's not like they looked real different. I mean, they were all Germanic folks, so that was not an issue. Of course, people began to think, how could they have managed if they had not had peasants and slaves? Well, they couldn't have. Because obviously this class of folks not going to get out there doing any hoeing and picking, right? They have all these other folks do it for them. But given the nature of agriculture and the nature of their world, they must have been fighting each other for lands, power, and all the time these poor folks, the masses of Germanic people, are working for them. See, that's what they are. And wouldn't it be interesting to know more about them? But alas, we do not. We know, in fact, that if you had, presumably, some bent towards the military and you got tired of doing the agricultural tasks, perhaps you could become part of someone's comitatus. I don't think they were totally opposed to bringing people in, but that's merely my guess. Now, we know that there were Germans in the Roman Empire, no question about it. How did they come in? They came to farm. They came because they were not forbidden at all. In fact, in many areas, they would have been welcomed. I mean, the land was just vacant. It's not as if you got a lot of folks in there who are saying, you know, we want to farm. There just is not that much to be gained by farming in a time of declining population. So many abandoned, and the Germans come in. Remember, there's no border wall. I'm sure they let in some gradually, and these folks farm. What becomes of them, we don't know. Now, the other interesting element of these people who come in to fight, the Federati, they don't come in as individuals, although I'm sure that there were some who did. Joined the Roman army, maybe offered citizenship for fighting. But I think the Federati is just as interesting. The Federati are German contingents who join the Roman military. They are groups of Germans who fight and say, you know, you might have to fight some of your cousins, and cousin Werner in that force. Would you do that, Otto? I said, that's okay. We're just glad to be Roman. Declining and conjugating. Because, see, they have to take special Latin courses to qualify. Yes, you believe that, right? So, yeah, the idea is these Federati then become a part of the Roman force. And you understand they are not individuals. They come in as units. And you think once they get down there, they're going to say, gosh, I miss the swamp. I want to go home. I'm getting real hungry. No, shoot, they're in somewhere like Italy, Greece. They're somewhere and they think, this is great, I'm not leaving. So we assume that individuals and groups would stay on. Again, it's very hard to know because we just don't have the details. And now the ugly H word rears its head. I mean, Arianism. Arius, many will recall, was that Christian clergyman. Yes, he was. He was fully ordained. He had his credentials. From Egypt. That's right. From Egypt. And he probably was a member of some philosophy club. Hung out with philosophers. You know how they can be. And then he started saying, well, philosophically, this Holy Trinity is a big no-go. Yeah. And some of them said, yeah, you know, you're right. I've had a lot of problems with that Trinity myself. He said, yeah. Y'all want to form a group? The next thing you know, another heresy is born. Arianism, or the denial of the Trinity. Yeah. And it all started at a philosophy club meeting. I blame these people. I blame these people because they just don't stop. But you would blame me if I didn't stop. You now have a break. So you can, and try not to think about Arians during your break. Try to have a nice time. 4.5 minutes. Okay. Back to the Trinity. I know you've been worried the past few minutes about the Trinity. But believe me, we'll save the Trinity momentarily. But right now, the Trinity seems somewhat endangered. Ulfilas, that's a name to drop on friends when you're at a party and see who knows. Because if you were to hang out with Arians, maybe they would know. Just ask around, and maybe you can slip in incognito. And they say, do you know who brought Arianism to the Germans? Well, his name is Ulfilas. Maybe he was the principal one. I find it very hard to believe, although this is what we teach, that Ulfilas was the only Arian agent out there. I think it would probably take a whole band of Arians. I mean, it's got to be pretty brave, too. I mean, all these people are, as we say in the books, fierce pagans. And when we say fierce, it doesn't mean they're going to welcome. This is not an inquirer's class I'm talking here, okay? These people are hardcore heathen. And it appears that Ulfilas, who may have been a North European, presumably Romanized, had become very interested in the Arian doctrines. So, Christianity being evangelical, even heretical, he wants to spread it to his German friends. And many of them took the bite. This apple of heresy. We would love to, yeah. We wish to become heretics. And you realize if one goes, we all go. I didn't ask you multiple choice here, right? Okay, so it's not like pagan, Arian, Orthodox. We don't have that going for us, okay? It's like we go one way or the other. The missionaries of Arianism seem to have reached a majority of Germanic peoples who converted. It's a very bizarre situation to me, but an interesting one. Because someone asked me during the break, why did people become Arians? It had been an intellectual matter in the East, Egypt and elsewhere. But they had taken it from that kind of setting. Arianism was getting uncool. You know, heresies come and go. Because, you know, grandparents will say, you know, grandchildren will tell us, why did you all like Arianism, Granny? You know, that kind of thing. People just don't understand it. But now it gets new life in the Germanic people, which I find fascinating. This will become very important as we turn to this fellow, the scourge of God, as he was known. In other words, you got a bunch of sinners, here comes Attila. He will take care of you. Because remember, if you think this is bad, you got it coming. Okay? So don't ever doubt that. Attila's life and career is known again by Christian sources. And his people, who are called Huns, are to be carefully differentiated from Germanic peoples. They are Asiatic peoples. They were horse-riding peoples. And for Germanic and Roman peoples alike, they were scary peoples, unlike anyone they had known. I expect they were related to Mongols. Whatever they were given all kinds of credits which they may or may not have deserved. For example, some of the sources claim they were like half horse, half man, because the Huns never seemed to get off their horses. So people just assumed that they were horsemen. Horseman, get it bad. And then you say, well, if you ride a horse all the time, then aren't you going to get hungry? And they say, no problem. Do you remember when we were children something called flavor straws? Yeah, I used to love those. Well, anyway, they saw this as a relationship of the person could just draw strength from the horse blood. He had the straw, Because you remember how you enjoyed your flavor straw? And the strawberry and the milk would come. So then I always thought about, yeah. So there were lots of interesting stories about Arian. When you get sort of down, okay, and Flicker's blood, and you'll be ready, and, you know, real pepped up. So there were lots of stories about these Huns, but because they looked differently, because they rode horses, and because they were definitely on a plan of aggression, they concerned the Germanic peoples greatly, far more than they concerned Romans, because their journeys, these Huns, began in the north. They were coming west from Asia. So they were coming up there and trying to take over these Germanic peoples. And this is when the true migration southward of the Germanic peoples will start in earnest. No longer do we have the idea of the wanderings of the people, but we are going to have almost mass migration. They are coming because they're trying to escape. Scholars have, of course, debated whether it was migratory, and yes, you could see they were coming down gradually over time. But now they are coming en masse, as we would say, beginning with Visigoths. At first, the Roman government, under, I would think, considerable pressure at the border, would have allowed it. The emperor, and notice this is 376, so this is still, if you're counting these things, it's still pretty early on. We haven't even got to the sack of Rome. But you know, from our perspective, we know all this. In 376, Valens, who was sympathetic because he too was an Arian, which is somewhat odd, we understand that Valens decides this is the best way. He invites the Visigothic leaders, as they were called. They were Gothic. They were not the only Goths, but that the particular group called Visigoths came in en masse. Boy, can you imagine all those folks? Because it's everybody. It's not just warriors. You know, you had this image of these big blondes all coming in. I don't think it was that way at all, because it's like the wives and the children, the old folks, peasants. Somebody's got to work. All these folks, and they're coming across, and the Romans are watching them. And then what cracks me up is thinking Wolfgang and Otto and all that may be in the Roman army. And they're watching all these people and probably looking at them kind of with hostility. Y'all come on in. And what are we going to do? The Romans plan to settle these people. And you know what I mean? Like settlements, reservations, if you will. Say, now, you all can stay, no weapons, but you all can stay on these lands and you behave because you're here because we said you could be here. I know you're scared of the Huns, and we are glad to have you. Now, we'll bring in some Latin teachers next week because you won't be needing any German here. But you will need lots of Latin. No, I don't know how they communicated. Maybe it was through German interpreters who were already in the Roman army. Whatever it was going to be, we are told that the Romans mistreated them. Maybe they were shortchanged by agents, whatever it was. The Visigoths got tired of staying on the land that the Romans had assigned them. Trouble. Big trouble. This, remember, is before a mass German movement into the Roman world. This is just the start. And of course, now we are ready for one of those battles that they say in the books, world determining, you know, and all of that. The Battle of Adrianople, which you can see from the map, is over in the east in Greece. They came in 378, and these Visigoths basically, don't know how they did it. They must have had leadership, obviously, to pull off this kind of revolt. But the Battle of Adrianople defeated a whole Roman army. It must have been ugly. The emperor himself was killed. So you can imagine theologically how that was interpreted. And the Visigoths are sitting pretty. They beat the Romans. And what are they going to do about it? Well, now they're basically like, sort of like Mr. Horace Greeley. They're going to go west. You know, in the old days, you'd say they could go east, but for reasons best known to them, they decided to go west. Do you see what I mean? It's like, what should we do now? We beat the Romans, killed a lot of them. It's all up to us. So these Visigoths say, let's go west. And that's what happens after 378. And you say, where are they going? They don't know. They're just drifting. But we're Big V. We're big Visigoths. And we're proud. And this fascinates me. I guess they have Arian clergy along to have Mass and confession, what they need. No Trinity. It's very interesting, though, and I think this map, you know, you got your east and west and so forth. And again, the reason the Visigoths are there is because the Huns terrorized them into moving south. And you think the Huns are still very busy. They are working on the development of their northern empire. And more of the German people are trying to come south, better climate, agricultural opportunities, and so forth and so on. But I think this is the battle that will begin the end of the empire in the West. Because as the Visigoths move on, we're going to have the sack. Now again, if you go to a party and nobody knows 378, they'll know 410. Okay? Count on me. That is, if you go to a big history party. 410 is, again, one of those dates. St. Jerome fell apart completely. He was in a monastery in Jerusalem, and yeah, it was hard. He was working on Latin translations, and St. Jerome just flipped out. He said, well, beginning of the end. The idea of sacking Rome. You know, have you ever thought about sacking a city? I mean, what do? You go in, you get souvenirs, and you don't pay. Because a sacking does not mean you're going around and destroying everything. They liked Rome. Rome is fine. But it's expensive to be a tourist, isn't it? Well, what if you didn't have to pay for anything? Wouldn't it be better? You have a nice time because their leader, Alaric, big chief, he had told his forces, you fellas can have a nice time here for a couple of days. Then we need to come back together. We've got more to do. We've got new explorations. In the words of the old song, we've only just begun. So let's not end it. So they went, and then they left. I don't imagine many of the Romans were sorry to see them leave, but 410 is a shock, I'm sure, as much psychotically as it was physically for the Roman people. It certainly was for people who thought, you know, Rome will always be here. Rome is the great symbol of our authority and all of that. Well, get over there. Even though it's not a Visigothic Rome, they came and said this was wonderful. It's like, you know, you've seen all the sights, and I'm afraid we're going to have to leave now. But it was great. Thank you. So, off they go. Next, the Visigoths will continue southward, and they will ultimately settle. Again, they're Arians. And they will settle there in Spain and southern France, because they didn't know they were Spain and southern France then, but we know that these will become their lands. And you say, but I thought people already lived there. They did. But guess what? They will still live there, but they will be ruled by these people, these Visigoths. So we'll call them Visigothic kingdoms, and you go, how did that happen? Well, they just rule over these folks. They don't ask for a vote. There's no popular mandate. They just come to rule these lands. But remember, these are lands that had been Roman. You say, where are the Roman officials? They have gotten out as fast as they could go. You understand, all of this Roman authority simply evaporates as all this is going on. It's really kind of interesting, and they just take over. You say, well, how multicultural? Yes, it is, because these folks, they're not going to turn to these Germans and say, do we need to pay taxes this year? How much of our crop will you? I don't think there is a lot of communication like that. I think there are a lot of Latin to German questions that will be coming up, that people will have certain linguistic issues. But it's very, very interesting, isn't it, to think about how this transmission came about. But all that's going on during the 5th century, and y'all come. And that means the other Germanic people are on the way. And you say, how did they get in? Well, shoot, the borders in the Western Roman Empire are gone. It's open. Welcome, Germans. We want you. We love you. Well, no, but you can come on in, because there's nobody going to stop you. Again, opportunities of this sort are not unknown in past times. The only difference now is that it is not regulated. They're just sort of pouring in as tribes and as various groups. And there's nobody saying, well, now, you can have this many of that. It's just pell-mell, as we used to say. And as such, there are undoubtedly going to be questions about who rules what, or even people fighting over lands. Yes, Germanic peoples are fighting with each other as they are dominating the Romans. And one of the groups who were, as we say in the South, kissing cousins, are the Ostrogoths. And you say, well, how does an Ostrogoth know not to go out with the Visigoths? Well, I think they know. I think somehow these folks, they're Gothic, say, you believe in the Trinity? And they say, oh, no. No Trinity, man, no Trinity. Say, oh, you're Gothic. Yeah, but I'm busy. What are you, Austro? Okay. I mean, they know they have differences. But they come in and they ultimately will come to rule over what we call Italy and surrounding areas. The Visigoths had already moved on out. So they will become two of the principal kingdoms over time. All this takes time. Because at first they are simply a ruling Germanic people over these lands. And they're both tainted. Yeah, that's the books always say. Tainted with heresy. Yeah, never forget that. Don't say, oh, well, they were coming around. Well, maybe, but we didn't know. They're still pretty dangerous. Now, as we look at it, we get into a cast of Germanic peoples. And, of course, the Huns will be right behind them. The Huns will come too, because the Huns get interested. You know, if everybody else is going south, maybe there's something down there we don't know about. And it's fascinating, isn't it, to think how these peoples, you see that large area that it was not, it's not Roman, but see, this is called the Hunnish Empire. I don't think they knew they had an empire, but that's what, you see way up there it says Hunnish Empire. And it's absolutely amazing. Oh, they had an emperor. No, let's not do any of that. Don't think about some imperial court and everybody is satin and lace. But it means lands where they know about the Huns and they stay out of their way. And as many of these Germanic peoples who lived up there, they were going south as while they could go. So Hunnish areas seem very, very large indeed. And again, Gothic peoples and other Germanic peoples are moving south. And how do they go south? They cross the Rhine and Danube. They are crossing, and they are thinking, oh, my ancestors would be so proud. Because, you know, they'd been kept out from going south, the ancestors. And now we're just crossing, and nobody's saying one word to us except welcome. Howdy, glad y'all are here. It is fascinating. So this underwrites, you say, well, what of the Western Empire? Well, I think it's seen its better days. Roman government, this is the 5th century. If you know 410, then when I say 476, I know you'll be titillated, because then you know the last Roman emperor in the West. Now it may make more sense to you. The fact that symbolically little Romulus Augustulus would be thrown off the Roman throne. But does it really matter? I mean, it's like the party's over already. And little Romulus, I mean, he was thrilled, but you're not getting a pension. I mean, you're 16 years old, get a job. I mean, it's like there's no there. The Western Roman Empire, you know, 476. So it's more symbolic, I think, obviously. And meanwhile, these various Germanic peoples, and there are lots of them, they are pouring in, fighting with each other, trying to establish their authority over certain lands. I was here before you. You know that kind of thing. Just imagine. There will be one group whose name needs no significance because they gave us that word, the Vandals, and they're going to end up in the South. What always fascinates me about the Vandals, you see that kind of Grey Poupon company down there, you see them, and you think, how did they get over from Spain? I'm thinking, man, some quick technology must have taught them how to sail. Because I don't think vandals had kind of sailing activities up north, do you? I mean, I think this is not what they were about. But somehow, in fighting with the Visigoths in what we call Spain nowadays, they must have acquired that ability. And as they did so, then they crossed over to meet a North African Roman populace who were probably not excited to see them. They too were Arians, and they would rule over a Catholic North African population. These Vandals, and boy, the stories are not good. Yeah, the Vandals, ratemygermanpeople.com, they got very, very bad reviews. They were the worst. I mean, you say some of them would say, well, they're not that bad. They're illiterate, and they sometimes can be rude and smell. But in many ways, they have some really good points, and they seem to care a lot and blah. You know, they go to church, but not these. These Vandals are hateful, awful. So, Vandals in North Africa, Visigoths, and ultimately, as these people will put themselves together, the Huns will come south dreaming of creating an even... I think Attila basically wore himself and his ideas out. You can just do so much, and then you lose, and that's what happened to him. The battle, and you see where that red cross is up here, that is called Chalon. And what I like about it is it's an ecumenical battle. The Romans and the Germans fight together. Now that's touching, isn't it? They say, do you hate Huns? Because you get this gigantic German-Roman pep rally, and they say, who hates Huns? And you hear all the, yes, I don't think anybody voted pro-Hun, right? So with the Germans and Romans coming together, and again, in my idle time, I contemplate what that army would have been like, because you had all the interpreters there who could give orders to the military forward. But anyway, the Huns got licked. Great day for civilization. And you're saying, but poor Attila. Well, yes, psychologically this was painful. He, however, labored on. He said, fellas, this seems like a dark day, but we have lots of new opportunities. I'm making new German friends everywhere. I'm hoping for expansion, and I'm hoping that we can all work together in our Hun team and create a brand new opportunity. I mean, so Chalon, we don't want to think about it as the bitter end. Meanwhile, he did try to go to Rome. But as Raphael shows us in one of Raphael's greatest hits, he didn't make it. And I'll show you the reason. You see those fellows flying up there? Peter and Paul. And Peter and Paul are saying, you just go back where you came from, you big loser. And that's to Attila, and you say, my, what a nice looking fellow on horseback. And yes, that is supposedly Pope Leo I, but it's really Pope Leo X. Pope Leo X was paying Raphael's bills. Yes, Pope Leo X said, "Oh, shucks, if you want to use me as the model, I guess I can do that." So it's good to get work. So it's actually him and Paul and Peter protecting the church are going, "You get out of here, Hans. You're losers. You're going to hell, so go on." So Rome is saved. Great painting, though. One of my favorites. And it is a strange meeting. I think you can agree. Oh, and then, of course, historians have to come along and ruin it by bringing up real things like maybe the Huns had gotten word that there was disease in Rome, or, some sort of. Yeah, and I mean, to base it on scientific facts, that's boring. I like the saints better coming down and beating up on the Huns. But whatever the case, we do know that Attila's days are numbered. And yeah, it's nice to know it was during love. Yes, after a life filled with violence, he married, Brunhilde or something. And maybe that last cocktail, amour, amour. That was the end of Attila. Yes, it could have been foul play. Again, like maybe on BBC, because you're always thinking, could there be a murder? Yes, there may have been. They say his brains were bashed in. But I like my version better. In any event, the end of the story is simple. The Huns can't stay together without Attila, and the Han menace is no longer a factor. But the Germans are here to stay, And so we will start there next time. Thank you all very much. Thank you.